if everything you thought you knew about the Mafia bosses was a lie? Gregory Scarpa, one of the most feared crime bosses, was secretly an FBI informant for 30 years. And Vincent Gigante, he faked insanity for 3 decades, only to be exposed as completely sane. These shocking discoveries have shattered the myths around them, raising one chilling question: how many more secrets are still buried in the world of organized crime? Gregory Scarpa. The ruthless Colombo family capo known as the Grim Reaper, Greg Scarpa was feared for his brutality and deadly reputation. But years later, a shocking truth surfaced. He had secretly spent 3 decades as an FBI informant. This changed everything, making people wonder if he was really a mafia leader or just a government spy all along. Greg Scarpa was involved in all aspects of the crew. He ran gambling, loan sharking, and extortion operations, regularly carrying about $5,000 in cash on his person to hand out bribes to people. Meanwhile, he was a prolific mafia hitman in his own right, and he was good at what he did. Behind the scenes, however, he lived a sort of double life. No-nonsense mobster by day, loving father by night. Linda Shiro, Scarpa's girlfriend of 30 years with whom he had 2 children, told the New York Post in 2007 if it was a big murder, an important one, he would leave the numbers 666 on some of the guy's pagers. But in 1962, his world came crashing down when he was arrested for armed robbery. To avoid prosecution, Scarpa struck a deal with the FBI, marking the beginning of a 30-year-long partnership with the Bureau, one that came in handy for the FBI, as they would later recruit Scarpa to help intimidate the Ku Klux Klan after the Mississippi burning murders. While working with the FBI, Greg Scarpa remained just as ruthless a mobster as ever. In fact, he reportedly bragged that he stopped counting the number of people he'd killed after he hit 50. Scarpa got into legal trouble in May 1993. He pleaded guilty to 3 murders and conspiracy to murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He died of AIDS-related complications at the Federal Medical Center in Minnesota. As Scarpa's connection to the FBI remained a secret for years, the truth about Vincent Gigante's mental state came to light much later. Vincent Gigante.
It's worked for him for 20 years. Hopefully it's not going to work for him much longer.
An old man wandering around in his pajamas, a bathrobe, and a ratty pair of house slippers muttering nonsense to nobody, in particular, is a fairly typical sight in New York City. But Vincent Gigante was anything but typical. Vincent the Chin, famously known as the Odd Father, spent decades pretending to be insane, confusing doctors, and frustrating law enforcement. His act allowed him to avoid prison and extend his control over the Mafia. But after 30 years of psychiatric evaluations, the truth finally came out. He was declared mentally fit to stand trial in 1997, proving his insanity was just a clever ruse. He ran New York's Genovese crime family for nearly a quarter century. After assuming power in the early 1980s, the Chin raked in some $100 million, calling the shots for upwards of 300 made men operating in New York's Little Italy, on the Miami docks, and in the streets of Philadelphia. Loyal soldiers apparently referred to him by rubbing their chins after Gigante issued an edict that his name not be uttered in public. It might be hard to envision now, but the crime boss routinely gallivanted around Greenwich Village, Manhattan, in a bathrobe, slippers, and a floppy hat pulled down low on his head. He was known to urinate in public, play pinochle in storefronts, and even hid a second family from his wife. His relatives, including a brother who was a Roman Catholic priest, insisted Gigante suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. In 1990, he was charged with a bid-rigging scheme, followed by a 1993 indictment for ordering multiple murders, including a hit on John Gotti. Throughout his trials, his lawyers argued he was mentally unfit, but in 1996, a judge ruled he was lying. In 1997, Gigante was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder, and sentenced to 12 years in prison, where died at the age of 77. Next, we have Michael Franzese, a former mobster who later reinvented himself as a motivational speaker. Michael Yuppie Don Franzese.
Now, you believe that the Mafia has something to do with JFK's murder?
Yeah, I believe that firmly because of what I was told. And there's no reason for people to mislead or lie to me.
Michael Franzese is a former mobster who worked as a caporegime in the Colombo crime family, which is known for organized crime activities in New York City, USA. He later renounced organized crime and evolved into an author, activist, and motivational speaker. Son of notorious Italian-American crime lord John Sonny's Franzese Sr., Michael was raised amidst an atmosphere of crime and illegal activities. This is how he got involved in organized crime early in his life. In the ensuing years, he moved up the ranks and became a caporegime of the the Colombo crime family. He operated his father's illegal rackets during his father's imprisonment in the 1980s. According to reports, Franzese made millions masterminding a gasoline tax swindle. As the Mafia prince, he was one of the highest earners the mob had seen since Al Capone. He was also featured in Fortune magazine's list of the 50 most wealthy and powerful Mafia bosses. When fell in love with Camille Garcia, a dancer from California, he began to question his future with the mob. "I knew the life was bad," he said. For his involvement in the gasoline bootlegging racket, Michael was arrested in 1985 and was indicted on 14 counts of racketeering, counterfeiting, and extortion. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts the following year. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was also asked to cough up $14 million in restitution payments. During his time behind bars, a prison guard handed a frustrated Franzese a Bible. It made a difference. Between 1991 and 1994, Franzese turned to a different kind of life. He later quit organized crime and became a devoted Christian and motivational speaker. He also founded the Breaking Out Foundation to help youngsters avoid the dreadful path of crime and addiction. After Franzese, we have Whitey Bulger, who in a shocking twist of fate became a victim of a deadly experiment. James Joseph Whitey Bulger Jr. From 1975 to 1990, Bulger worked as an FBI informant, something he kept hidden for almost 20 years. During this time, he made friends with his federal handler, John Connolly, and used him for all sorts of information. Connolly eventually leaked the whereabouts of a former Bulger associate, John Callahan, to the gangster. In 1995, he told Bulger the FBI was tailing him and helped the criminal slip away. The eccentric gangster grew up on the streets of Boston in the early 1940s and was only a teenager when he turned to a life of crime. Throughout his life, Bulger robbed banks, committed murder, and dealt in the international arms trade. His long and storied life came to an end on October 30th, 2018, when he was allegedly killed in prison by other inmates. Years later, it was also discovered that while serving time in Atlanta for armed robbery, Bulger took part in the U.S. government's MKUltra program. Bulger later reported the government simply injected him with LSD as a part of furthering their brain warfare program. In 1957, Bulger wrote of his experience with MKUltra, describing it as 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state. He continued, describing the terror he experienced while on the drug, total loss of appetite, hallucinating. The room would change shape, hours of paranoia and feeling violent. We experienced horrible periods of living nightmares and even blood coming out of the walls. Guys turning to skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of a dog. I felt like I was going insane. Bulger later claimed that he suffered from lifelong insomnia because of the experiments. Moving forward, we have Provenzano, a feared mobster who found faith and left the crime world behind. Bernardo Provenzano. Years later, it was discovered that Bernardo Provenzano had become deeply religious, a transformation that left many questioning whether it made him less dangerous, or even more so. Once an invisible figure in the underworld, some doubted he was even alive. Yet behind the scenes, he controlled the mob with an iron grip, limiting their licenses to kill and justifying the few he approved with an almost divine authority he believed he possessed. Born in the Sicilian hilltop town of Corleone, Provenzano was the original godfather. He spent over 4 decades on the run, communicating with his men through coded messages based on Bible passages, which were smuggled to them hidden within religious texts. He was known as Bernardo the Tractor, a reference to the rate at which he mowed his victims down with a submachine gun. Despite his deepening faith, his reign was built on blood. It is believed he ordered the deaths of at least 1,000 people. Police found a Bible covered in dots, arrows, and notations, which, once deciphered, led to the arrest of key allies. When authorities finally captured him in 2006, in prison he was found sitting on his bed, surrounded by false teeth, an impotence leaflet, and 7 cashmere sweaters, small comforts in a life that had unraveled. His son, Francesco, who had once been on the run with him, later revealed the horrifying conditions his father endured. His bedding was soaked with urine and stained up to the part that covers his shoulders. It was a lung infection that finished him off this week after 10 years in jail, although some say he had in effect died 4 years ago when he fell in his cell and hit his head, leaving him unable to speak. After Provenzano, we have Antonio Bardellino, who was declared dead until shocking evidence surfaced years later, revealing a truth more twisted than anyone imagined. Antonio Bardellino. As the head of the Casalesi clan, Antonio dominated organized crime in Caserta during the 1980s, ruling with the cunning and brutality of an old-school godfather. Official reports claimed he was assassinated in Brazil in 1988, but whispers of his survival never truly faded. Then, years later, a chilling revelation emerged. In a conversation intercepted by the Italian financial police, Angelo Bardellino spoke words that sent shockwaves through investigators. He is in the United States, he is in America, he is in Mexico, he is young and strong. This conversation, recorded in 2012, directly contradicted the long-held belief that Antonio Bardellino was dead. For authorities at the District Anti-Mafia Directorate, this wasn't just speculation, it was a startling confirmation that the notorious boss might still be alive. Investigators found 2 photos of men aged 60 to 70, which experts say closely matched Antonio Bardellino. One was seized during Angelo Bardellino's arrest, the other from an investigative source. If these images were truly of Bardellino, it meant he hadn't died in 1988 at 43, but had faked his death and lived in hiding for decades. If Bardellino had indeed faked his own death, it meant he had managed to evade law enforcement for over 3 decades, possibly continuing his criminal activities under a new identity. His escape would have required careful planning, high-level connections, and immense resources, something only a figure of his stature could have pulled off. Rumors swirled about his whereabouts. Had he truly built a new empire in Mexico? Was he hiding in the US? The idea that a mafia kingpin of his caliber had outsmarted authorities for so long left many questioning whether he had ever truly disappeared, or if he had simply stepped into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Our list continues with the most infamous mafia boss, Al Capone. For some, his name stirs up images of a cigar-chomping folk hero mobster involved in everything from racketeering to murder and drug running. For others, maybe there's a desire to know the truth about the man who inspired Scarface. Al Capone ruled Chicago with an iron grip, ensuring no competition or dissent by eliminating anyone who stood in his way. From rival bootleggers to troublesome customers, he had one simple rule: cross him and you're dead. But with so much blood on his hands, he needed a way to escape. Justice. His solution? Own the system. Capone spent millions bribing police officers, public officials, lawyers, and judges, effectively controlling more than half of Chicago's law enforcement. With the right people in his pocket, he was nearly untouchable. Ironically, Capone took on the role of peacemaker, appealing to the other gangsters to tone down their violence. He even managed to broker an amnesty between rival gangsters, and for 2 months, the killing and violence ceased. Al Capone's fight with rival gangster Bugs Moran led to one of the most famous murders in history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On February 14, 1929, Moran's men were tricked into coming to a garage to buy whiskey. They didn't know McGurn's men, dressed as police officers, were waiting for them. The fake cops made them line up, took their weapons, and shot them all. But there was one mistake. Moran wasn't there. He saw the police car outside and ran away just in time. Capone died at age 48 on January 25, 1947, in Palm Island, Florida. His cause of death was cardiac arrest. During his last years in prison, Capone's declining health was exacerbated by tertiary syphilis, and he became confused and disoriented. Next, we have Messina Denaro, a man who appeared ruthless on the outside, but was very different inside. Matteo Messina Denaro. Years after his crimes, shocking revelations emerged about Messina Denaro, not just about his brutal past, but about his hidden emotions as well. Among the evidence discovered after his arrest was a personal diary, where the ruthless mafia boss revealed his deep torment over the absence of his daughter, Lorenza. Denaro, once known as the boss of bosses, was responsible for some of Italy's most heinous crimes. He infamously claimed to have killed enough people to fill a cemetery and orchestrated the 1992 assassinations of anti-mafia prosecutors Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Despite his monstrous reputation, the diary entries painted a different side of him, one filled with longing and regret. In a 2014 entry, Denaro wrote, "As a father, I was mistreated by destiny. Fate has sacrificed me for other purposes." He added, "Your absence cancels me out." Lorenza, his daughter from a secret relationship with Sicilian woman Franca Alagna, had grown up without ever knowing him. Then, in 2016, while hiding in his hometown of Castelvetrano, Denaro spotted Lorenza by chance. She was in a car with her mother. Risking capture, he followed them and watched as she stepped out to greet a friend. It was a brief encounter, but for Denaro it was enough. He later wrote that he could die serenely after seeing her. Journalist Giovanni Bianconi, who published the diary extracts, remarked that they revealed Denaro's immense ego. But one mystery remains. Did Lorenza ever receive these letters, or were they just the thoughts of a man who had lost everything? The criminal underworld is full of mysteries, and Joseph Valachi was one of them. Joseph Joe Cargo Valachi. Joseph Valachi made history when he became the first mafia insider to publicly break omerta, the sacred code of silence. In a televised testimony, he exposed the inner workings of the mafia, revealing that insiders never used the word mafia, but instead called it Cosa Nostra. Wearing a suit and tie, occasionally smoking a cigarette, he described the organization's structure, the secret blood induction ceremony, and the powerful bosses who ruled New York's 5 crime families. His revelations shocked America and confirmed what many had only suspected. Born in 1904, Valachi started as a burglar and getaway driver in New York City, running with a gang called the Minutemen, named for their ability to break in and escape within minutes. Over time, he became a heroin dealer and feared Mafia hitman, suspected of involvement in more than 20 murders. He was a soldier in the Genovese crime family and survived the Castellamarese War, a bloody Mafia battle for dominance in New York during the early 1930s. Despite his long career in organized crime, Valachi's downfall came in his late 50s when he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for drug trafficking. Behind bars at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, he chose to betray the Mafia, fearing for his own life. His testimony was a turning point in the fight against organized crime, offering law enforcement an unprecedented look inside the mob. After his explosive confessions, Valachi lived a lonely existence at La Tuna prison, constantly monitored by guards. He even attempted suicide by hanging. In 1971, at the age of 68, he died of natural causes while still in federal custody. He was buried near Lewiston, New York, close to the Canadian border. Next on our list is Salvatore Mascio, the organized crime boss of the island city of Galveston. Salvatore Sam Mascio. Salvatore Sam Mascio and his brother Rosario, known as Rose, arrived in Galveston, Texas around 1915, having immigrated from Palermo, Sicily in the early 1900s. Though not officially members of the Mafia, they were certainly familiar with organized crime from their upbringing. In a remarkably short time, they built a bootlegging empire and expanded into illegal gambling, opening the Hollywood Dinner Club, a speakeasy that offered high-stakes gaming. Sam acted as the charismatic public face of their operations, while Rose worked behind the scenes as the enforcer. In 1926, they took over and reopened a Chinese restaurant, renaming it Maceo's Grotto. However, their growing influence drew law enforcement's attention. In 1927, sheriff's deputies raided the Hollywood Dinner Club, smashing its slot machines and roulette tables, but the Maceos were undeterred. Sam famously justified their activities in a 1934 interview, stating, "We break the law, but in a way that people like. We give them what they want." He argued that Galveston needed vice to thrive, insisting, "No resort can be a resort unless it's wide open. Otherwise, Galveston would be nothing." By 1950, Sam opened The Corner, a tap room and oyster bar in downtown Galveston. However, his time was cut short when he was diagnosed with cancer. He traveled to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for surgery, but passed away in 1951. Weeks after his death, a Texas state investigation revealed that the Maceos had been running the largest illegal gambling operation in the state. Between 1949 and 1950 alone, they grossed $5.6 million, about $60 million, employing 600 people with a $1 million payroll. Rose was subpoenaed, but died in 1954, marking the end of their empire. Now, let's move to Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who was long credited for something he never actually did. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel is often incorrectly credited with creating the Las Vegas Strip, but history tells a different story. While he did play a role in shaping the city's future, Las Vegas was already home to several casinos and hotels before he arrived. As Meyer Lansky biographer Robert Lacey put it, Ben Siegel did not invent the luxury resort casino. He wrote, "He did not find the Las Vegas Strip. He did not buy the land or first conceive the project that became the Flamingo, but by his death, he made them all famous." Siegel's criminal career linked him to at least a dozen murders during his rise in the 1920s and 1930s. Even as a teenager, his violent temper earned him the nickname, "Crazy as a bedbug." In one infamous incident, after an assassin tried to kill him by dropping a bomb down a chimney, Siegel allegedly checked himself into the hospital, snuck out to murder the would-be assassin, and then slipped back into his room with his alibi intact. In 1946, he sought to transform himself from a mobster into a real estate mogul by taking over the struggling Flamingo Hotel and Casino project in Las Vegas. With financial backing from his longtime associate Meyer Lansky and other underworld figures, Siegel poured $6 million into making the Flamingo one of the most extravagant resorts in the area. Though it initially lost money, business eventually picked up, solidifying the Mafia's foothold in Las Vegas. Siegel's life came to a violent end on June 20th, 1947. While he was reading a newspaper at his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home, a gunman fired 9 shots through the window with a .30 carbine. 4 bullets struck Siegel, one of them blasting his eye from its socket. He died instantly. His murder remains unsolved. While Siegel died mysteriously, John Dillinger escaped prison in a very dramatic way. John Dillinger. John Dillinger's criminal exploits made him one of the most notorious gangsters of the 1930s. In January 1934, he was arrested in Tucson, Arizona, after locals recognized some of his wanted accomplices. Following intense media coverage, he was extradited to Indiana and placed in the Crown Point jail, where authorities insisted he could not escape. However, Dillinger proved them wrong in just over a month. On March 3, 1934, he staged a daring escape using what he claimed was a wooden gun, crafted from a block of wood, a razor handle, and black shoe polish. Some later reports suggested the weapon had been smuggled in by one of his attorneys. Regardless of its origin, Dillinger used it to overpower guards, seize a Thompson submachine gun, and make his way to the prison garage. He then stole the sheriff's personal police car and drove to Chicago. Just 3 days later, he was back in action, teaming up with Babyface Nelson and others to rob a bank in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. By May 1934, Dillinger's infamy and distinctive appearance made it difficult for him to stay hidden. In a desperate attempt to evade capture, he paid $5,000 to two underground surgeons, Wilhelm Loser and Harold Bernard Cassidy, for facial reconstructive surgery. The painful procedure removed his moles and scars, filled in his cleft chin, and used chemicals to burn off his fingerprints. However, years later, it was discovered that the surgery had done little to change his appearance. Reportedly, upon seeing his new face, Dillinger muttered in frustration, "Hell, I don't look any different than I did." Ultimately, betrayal sealed his fate. He was killed on July 22, 1934, after being set up by a friend. Ironically, the federal government spent more money trying to capture him than he had ever stolen. Another mafia boss who broke the mafia code of silence by deciding to work with law enforcement is Giovanni Brusca. Giovanni Brusca's arrest in 1996 marked a dramatic turning point in his criminal career. Known as Il Mazzellaio, meaning the butcher for his ruthless brutality, Brusca had long been one of the most feared figures in the Sicilian mafia. However, what truly set him apart was the unexpected decision he made after his capture. He broke the mafia's sacred code of silence. Defying Cosa Nostra's strict oath of secrecy, Brusca chose to cooperate with law enforcement, a move that sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. His testimony exposed the mafia's inner workings, providing crucial details about its operations, key figures, and violent power struggles. His revelations helped authorities dismantle major mafia factions and prosecute high-ranking mobsters who had long evaded justice. He was born in 1957 in San Giuseppe Giotto, Sicily, and ascended through the Cosa Nostra's ranks to become one of its most powerful and feared bosses. First and foremost, Brusca's fame originated from his role in the high-profile 1992 assassination of anti-mafia prosecutors Paolo Borsellino and Giovanni Falcone, which startled Italy and the rest of the world. He gained a terrifying reputation due to his brutality and willingness to assassinate anyone who was thought to pose a danger to the mafia's interests. Surprising aspects of Brusca's character were also exposed upon his final capture in 1996. Brusca's cooperation did not come without consequences. While his betrayal of the mafia earned him powerful enemies, it also secured him significant legal benefits. In exchange for his testimony, he received reduced sentences for his crimes and was offered witness protection to shield him from inevitable retaliation. The Italian anti-mafia movement was significantly and permanently impacted by Giovanni Brusca's discoveries. His cooperation with the government led to a considerable disintegration of mafia factions by providing crucial insights into the inner workings of the Cosa Nostra. Moving forward, we have Sicilian mafia boss Salvatore Riina, who was exposed in a dramatic way. Salvatore Riina, the feared leader of the Sicilian Mafia, was finally exposed through a secret tape. The recording revealed the Mafia's struggles to survive and gave a glimpse into its inner workings. Riina, known as the Boss of Bosses, ruled with extreme violence, ordering the deaths of anyone who stood in his way. Nicknamed the Beast for his cruelty, Riina led the Corleonese faction to power in the 1980s by wiping out his rivals. He ordered the killings of judges, police officers, and other enemies to keep control. His crimes were not just against his enemies, he also targeted innocent people. In 1984, he ordered a train bombing between Naples and Milan on Christmas Eve, killing at least 16 people. This attack was meant to distract police from investigating the mafia after an informant had exposed their secrets. One of his biggest battles was against two brave magistrates, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. They led the famous Maxi trial, which resulted in the conviction of 475 mafia members, including Riina. His days as a free man ended in 1990 1993, when he was finally captured and sentenced to 26 life terms for multiple murders. Even in prison, Riina remained dangerous. He ordered the kidnapping and killing of an 11-year-old boy, the son of an informant. The boy was strangled, and his body was dissolved in acid to send a warning to others. As he grew older, Riina suffered from serious health problems, including heart attacks and kidney cancer. He died in prison, but his years of terror left a dark mark on Mafia history. Our list ends with the Los Angeles Mafia boss, Jack Dragna. Years after Jack Dragna's death, new information emerged about his secret business dealings in Hollywood. It was discovered that Dragna had quietly built connections with influential figures in the film industry, using his criminal network to exert control over certain aspects of Hollywood. Through extortion, bribery, and intimidation, he managed to secure financial interests in nightclubs, talent agencies, and even film productions. Jack Dragna was a powerful Sicilian-American mafia boss who ruled the Los Angeles underworld for decades. Born in Sicily in 1891, he immigrated to the United States in the early 20th century and became involved in organized crime. Dragna was part of the Black Hand, an extortion racket that targeted Italian immigrants by threatening them with violence if they did not pay protection money. He later joined the Mafia and rose to power, becoming the head of the Los Angeles crime family in the 1940s. Dragna was known for his cunning and ability to maintain control over the city's criminal activities, including illegal gambling, extortion, and racketeering. He worked closely with other mafia bosses but struggled to compete with the East Coast mobsters who had more influence and resources. One of the most significant events linked to Dragna was the 1947 murder of Bugsy Siegel, a well-known gangster who played a major role in developing Las Vegas. Siegel was shot at his girlfriend's home in Beverly Hills, and many believe Dragna was involved, as Siegel had angered the Mafia by mishandling money in the Flamingo Hotel project. However, no solid evidence ever directly tied him to the killing. Despite his influence, Dragna never gained the same level of power as Mafia bosses in New York or Chicago. He faced challenges from both law enforcement and rival gangsters. By the 1950s, his control weakened, and he eventually died of a heart attack in 1956. Which one of these revelations surprised you the most? Was there one that completely changed everything you thought you knew? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to click on the cards on the screen for more fascinating Mafia stories.